Hello, people of the internet. Steve Persh of Pantheon here. Today on the live stream, we're going to be talking about some of my favorite topics: automated testing, build processes, continuous integration, deployment pipelines. Now, all of the topics in this space can get really technical really quickly. We'll try to start simple. We'll look at a Drupal website that runs on Pantheon, and the developers who make changes to the code for this website, they do so through GitHub pull requests. And when those pull requests are made on GitHub, then CircleCI sees those changes and runs a series of jobs in a Docker containers that execute automations that are written in PHP, JavaScript, Bash. And I feel like I've already fallen into the trap of making this sound way too technical. I'm only like a minute in. And it's already too complex. All right, I'll try to keep it grounded. Let's start again. We're going to look at a website, and we're going to ask, how do changes to the code of that website make their way from a developer's laptop to the live website? That, I think, is a simpler question to start with. And if we are making code changes that make their way to the live website, how do we check that those code changes actually work? Can we check in some way that we didn't break anything? And can we do those while staying in a flow? Can we work efficiently? Those seem to be like better high-level questions to keep in mind than like the details of Docker containers in CI jobs. Now, for those of you who are watching live, please use the chat to keep me honest here. If we get too lost in the weeds, feel free to be noisy in the chat there. So joining the stream now, the guy who is working this workflow that I've been describing. Without further ado, let's bring in Sean Dietrich of Kanopi Studios. Hello, Sean. Good to see you.
Hey, Steve. Good to see you too.
Sean, we go a ways back. I think I first met you when you were at a previous job, like 7 years ago. You were adopting Pantheon. We talked about some of this stuff, developer workflows. We drew a lot of diagrams. We've seen each other a bunch at Drupal events, but for those who have not met you, introduce yourself. What's your role in your team at Kanopi?
Yeah, so my name is Sean Dietrich, and I am a senior operations architect at Kanopi Studios. What that really is just a lot of fancy words that says, hey, I'm helping out with not just the current life cycle of the website, but how do we plan for the future? How do we plan for what the client wants to do going forward? And what are the steps to move forward for that? On top of that, I help maintain and manage a lot of our CI/CD pipelines. And really, it's helping a lot of our staff with any sort of issues or new complexities that they're trying to solve. So helping them build and develop those. And then also helping people learn more about CI/CD pipelines and how automation can help alleviate some of those stressors that they were doing manually previously.
Could you say more about how you got into that?
Yeah,
that job description you just laid out, like it feels very specialized, but also very broad. Like you need to understand a whole lot of moving pieces to do what you're doing now. How did you get to that place?
So that's actually a really good question. It actually started from something that was really, really small. And what I mean by that is it felt, we found that we were doing a lot of things manually. We were constantly either deploying, we were compiling SAS, we were running into issues with PR requests and those compilations, CSS files. We were doing a lot of these things, and we were doing a lot of them manually. One of the things we wanted to do was, how do we alleviate some of those? So it's not like we jumped into the deep end of the ocean immediately. We started off small. And that's usually what I recommend people who are looking to explore more into CI/CD pipelines and getting involved with them is start small. Start with a simple problem or a simple challenge that you're trying to solve, and then essentially it grows from there. So we started with just taking our deployments and automating those. So deployments that would sometimes take 10, 15, 20 minutes, we were able to free up developer time in being able to automate that and manage that through a machine, through some automated mechanism. And learning that specific mechanism or tool was really, it was probably the most difficult part. And really, it was just like any other thing. It's how do you get Hello World to work?
Yeah. How do you get Hello World to work? And then how do you get Hello World to work, in the context of a real website that may be a whole lot more complex than Hello World? To give our discussion here a bit more grounding, perhaps we should bring up one of the real sites that you and Kanopi have been working on, I think, for a number of years. Coit Cleaning, a website that is near and dear to my heart as a customer of Coit Cleaning. This is well, I'll let you describe Coit, and then at some point I'll chime in with my personal connection.
Yeah, no problem. So, Coit Cleaning and Restoration is a U.S. and Canada-based company that works on cleaning your home and your business. So specifically, they do carpet cleaning, and they offer other services as well, such as stone cleaning and area rugs and air ducts. Air ducts is another big one. I think most people don't understand. Like you should be getting them clean. So they offer those services, as well as they offer a vast array of business services as well. So commercial, as well as they do have a 24-hour restoration line. So if you've had like flood or some sort of fire damage, they can come out and help you out with those services as well. But they are primarily, they are there to help the consumer clean their house.
Yeah, and I needed them about 4 years ago, and it just so happened that a few months before I needed Coit, I first heard the name Coit from Kanopi's CTO, Kat White. We were chatting at DrupalCon Seattle in 2019. We were on camera talking about like the benefits of a content delivery network that at the time was a newer feature for Pantheon. We've now had that baked in for a long time, and for a company like Coit, a content delivery network that caches the website very close to visitors is particularly important because what I found out, a few months later when I needed them, when a visiting toddler smeared diaper cream all over a sentimental upholstered chair, what did my wife and I do? Well, we Googled like upholstery cleaning Minneapolis, and Coit is like one of the top results, if not the top result. Click, 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 request services, fill out the form, and like that's it. That is what Coit needs from their website. Like we can see menus here. There's plenty of complexity here, but like as Kat was describing back then, what a company like Coit needs is making incremental gains in the people who do that Googling, click through, and then actually click request services, actually fill out the form. And it's a lot of little details to get that right. One detail that I suppose we could look at, Sean, is like the color of that button. But before we do, anything more we should add about the Coit website itself?
I mean, I think you've hit everything pretty spot on. It's just a lot of little things, and to your point, yeah, it's their main goal is to get people on there and fill out a form, and being able to serve that as quick enough as they can so that they're not waiting. I think is one of their main goals. So. So it sounds like they were able to achieve that even by when you needed services. So that
Yes.
I think that was a successful goal.
Yeah, I was standing there in my living room as the chair was being cleaned. I looked out and I just saw the van out there. I was like, wait, Coit, This sounds familiar. Cat White was telling me about this at DrupalCon. All right, so Coit.com is a website on Pantheon, but Sean, you as one of the developers or architects working on this, less of your time may be spent on Coit.com, maybe more of your time is spent interacting with a place like GitHub. So if you wanted to change the colors on this button, what would that look like on the GitHub side of things?
Yeah, so we host our repository on GitHub, and essentially that would be us pulling down the local repository. We would be working. We would set up a local environment. Once we set up the local environment, we would make those changes. We would then test those changes locally to make sure everything was functioning. We would then take our code and then we would push it up to GitHub, and then we would create a pull request. Some people might know them as PRs, but we would create pull requests, and essentially then once that happened, it would trigger a build within CircleCI, which is our CI/CD pipeline tool of choice. And once that happens, a whole bunch of other automated things would happen. So we would have our SAS compiled, and then multi-devs would get created. And then once the multi-devs get created, we would then have something we can view and test and be able to interact with before we actually make that change live.
Mm-hmm. Could you jump over to that other tab that shows an open pull request?
Yeah. So, yep, this was a simple one. We just wanted to change the button color from right now on the live site. We can see it is a white, and then we have white text. Here, we wanted to simply change it from white to a black color. And this is the simple process we would go through. We would come into our CSS file, our SAS file really, and we would change those colors from white to black, and from that salmon to a black, and then the white to black again.
All right, and I see here that there are some changes to some automated tests. We'll get to the necessity for those in a minute. But so far, we're making some basic color changes. What does that look like to the person at Coit who just wants to, like, who says, "Hey, Sean, change the button colors"? What does it look like to them on say the Pantheon multi-dev side of things?
Yeah, so once that multi-dev is created, that comes over here, and now what we were seeing before. So here's the live site again. We have these these white buttons, and then this one has black text or white text, and then this is the multi-dev, I should say, where we've now changed those from white to black, and then the text color from white to black as well. And this is what they would see. This is this specifically is the URL we would give them and say, here's how you would be able to test that, and then here's where they would be able to review those changes before going live.
All right. It feels like we've got a lot of moving pieces in play so far. Let's just to make sure that I haven't lost track of anything, and so that those watching live haven't lost track of anything, I want to diagram out what we have so far. While things feel so far relatively simple before they get even more complicated. Okay, so Sean, before the live stream, for those watching live here, Sean picked out our adventurer Lego. Sean, I think you have what perhaps might be a Jurassic Park body with like a motorcycle biker legs. And for no particular reason, I'm a guy in a life vest and sunglasses, and I've got a phone. So in our imagined world here, Sean, you are Sean, but you're adventurer Sean, and you're making your changes on your laptop. We'll pretend that I'm your Coit stakeholder. I'm slacking you from my phone, saying, Sean, I want to see the button in a different set of colors, and I just want to see that. Don't really care how. You make the change, push it up to GitHub, like in the wild, wild west days, you might say, yeah, no problem. I'll send that change straight over to the live environment. But we're not going to do that. Okay, so if we're not going to send the color change straight to the live environment, so far, what we know from what we've seen is that the live environment is on Pantheon. I'll label this. I've got a better looking diagram that I'll bring in just a minute. But for this quick and dirty one, so far we know that, Sean, you're making your changes on your laptop. You're pushing stuff up to GitHub. It ends up on a Pantheon multi-dev environment, which I'll abbreviate MD for multi-dev. Now, what we have not yet shown is how exactly do the changes get from the GitHub part to the multi-dev part. And Sean, have I misrepresented anything so far in my very simplistic diagram?
No, not at all.
All right.
Pretty good.
All right, so far so good. You've hinted at there is some continuous integration involved, and I've just been using black so far, but to throw in some color, continuous integration, will give us lots of either green passing tests or red failing tests. So CI is going to come in and do something. I'll go out on a limb and say that CI is watching changes from GitHub. The CI process is probably going to push things over to the multi-dev environment, but I'm guessing there's even more to it than that. So let's go back to your browser and find out what else is going on. Els, if you could, let's bring up Sean's browser again. Sean, we saw that the file you were changing was a SAS or SCSS file. So that's a file that's not getting sent straight to the browser. There must be some compilation of that going on. We've seen that you kind of just bailed out of a couple tests here. I'm guessing some automated tests were failing. But let's look at the CircleCI side of things and see what happens when a pull request is made. A CircleCI continuous integration process sees that a change is made and then does lots of things. But what kinds of things?
Yeah. All right. We will go. Here we go. So this was the most recent push I did. And you are correct in your diagram. Once we push to GitHub, GitHub sends a notification to CircleCI and says, hey, we pushed some new code. And then it kicks off a lot of our build processes that we have in there. So this is sort of a standard set of deployments or automations and or tests we run when pushing. So we did have, you are correct. We have a SCSS or a SAS file that we commit to the repository. We don't commit the compiled code, again, because the way that different machines are set up, the compilation piece can sometimes run into merge conflicts and can sometimes be a little bit difficult to fix over time. So we decided to have CI run that process for us and compile for us. But when we are pushing, we have this specific step in our process that says build our SAS, which is taking those SAS files and compiling them into actual CSS files that get served to the browser.
Yeah. Sean, one detail we didn't talk about beforehand, but it's occurring to me that a good way to illustrate what we're talking about here might be by looking at the git ignore file. So you're talking about the difference between what gets committed and then what's necessary for the real live website. So I will go out on a limb that feels like a pretty safe limb that the git ignore file has the CSS. There it is, line 17, I think.
Yep.
Line 17, your Drupal theme has a folder called CSS, but you're telling Git, the version control system, ignore that. Even though while you're developing, files are going to be there, don't commit them. because those are things that are artifacts that are like the result of a build process. The SAS file, the SCSS file is the thing you're committing. That's what you're editing. The CSS directory is just a byproduct of it.
Correct.
And then I imagine the same is true at like the PHP level for composer dependencies, yeah?
Yes. So we do, using Drupal, we do have a lot of we have our modules directory being ignored, specifically the contributed ones, as well as our themes. So when we look at our repository, we can see under our web directory, and then under our modules directory, we can see we just have a modules custom and then a custom, an actual custom module in there. So none of our Drupal core, none of our contributed modules, anything that we can get via composer dependencies, we are not storing in the repository, trying to keep it as lean as possible.
And can you speak more to like the pressures or the situation that made you think, all right, I don't want to commit these anymore? Like that's now, I think, a pretty solidified best practice in the Drupal community or a lot of the web development community to ignore these things. But my sense is that that's a thing or a decision pretty much every developer or every team has to come to on their own. Like, what was that like for you to decide, like, all right, I do need this split here?
For me, it was actually, it was like a breath of fresh air. It was great knowing that we no longer needed to do that. It was not something that we had to maintain within the repository. It made cloning down repositories a lot easier because we didn't have an extra, couple hundred megs of files that we had to store in the repository. So cloning that down became simpler, and then it became easier to maintain that repository. So I think all in all, I was excited when that decided to be like the best practice or the path going forward.
Yeah, I feel like that's an important point here. What, like, when we're talking about details that for someone earlier in their web development journey, this might look like a ton of complexity. If you could click back over to that set of CI jobs in CircleCI, like all of this just to make one CSS change. But yes, like I imagine each of these was like a hard learned lesson. And one that I'm most interested in is the end-to-end tests or what you're doing with Cypress. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of end-to-end tools out there. We ended up solidifying on Cypress mainly because one of the biggest things is Cypress has a recording output that allows you to see these step-by-step tests as you're going in a video format. So for instance, if I want to be able to test filling out a form on the site, I can say, okay, go to this page, and then it specifically will click a link for me. I will see it fill out the form with the specific details I have. If there are any issues with what's happening at that point, it shows up in that video real time. And that was one of the main reasons we specifically chose Cypress as the end-to-end test. But overall, we wanted to be able to start testing. We wanted to start to be able to do tests for big important pieces of the website, so that we could always catch if there was a regression in what we were doing.
Yeah, and that video piece, to me, is something you got to see to believe. Are there any of those video recordings that you could show?
It is. So we'll go on artifacts, and then I will show you probably the simplest one we have, which is simply being able to ensure that there is a Canada flag on the US site, specifically being able to make it that that's available. So for instance,
Mm-hmm.
we wanted to, Coit serves both US and Canada. We wanted to be able to make sure that this link was always showing up, regardless of what was happening. And so that was one of the simplest and I think the easiest tests we initially wrote to get into, to sort of dip our toe into the water of doing end-to-end testing.
Mm-hmm. Before Cypress, were you using Behat or any of those other tools out there for end-to-end testing?
We initially were going to start using Behat, and I found that it was a little complex because while it does give you a vast majority of things to write and to build, sometimes it's difficult if something doesn't exist to be able to have a developer know how to write that, and then the actual scripting language, which you're saying, hey, if this is here or I am this person, just became a little disconnected. So we chose Cypress again because the tests are written in a single file for us. So we didn't have to worry about adding a new set of contexts or things in other locations in order for our tests to work.
Yeah. Could you bring up the test file that drives this, or that generated this video? Yeah, I had a very similar experience as I first used Behat for end-to-end kind of testing, and Behat or any behavior-driven tool is aimed at a benefit of what if we write the tests in such a way that the test could be readable by anyone working on the project. We could have the client owner, the product owner, review the tests and give a thumbs up. In my experience, that was never the case. In a few years of talking with Pantheon partners, that was never the case. And it's just ended up simpler, better, to do it this way. If the developers are the only ones who ever end up reading or writing the tests, why not just be more direct about it and write the tests directly in a scripting language rather than having these two layers of abstraction, which makes it hard to know when anything breaks or where something breaks.
Correct.
So could you walk? So it's been a few years since I've written in Cypress, so I cannot read this test as plain as plain English from line 6. Could you tell me what's even happening here?
Yeah,
and
so
if possible, could you blow this up font-wise?
Yes, I can certainly do that. With that, sure. So we'll start from the beginning. So on line 1, we're essentially saying what the group of tests is being called. In this one, we just simply wanted the homepage to load. So we made it super simplistic. We said, well, we want to load the homepage. We specifically then, going down, we specifically said, hey, we want the browser to open up at a specific size. So when Cypress is testing, it's using a headless Chrome browser to test things. And therefore, we're saying we want it to open up by 1800 by 1536. And then we specifically want to configure the main URL we use to be the Canadian one. Now, the Canadian one is, as I mentioned before, Coit serves both US and Canada. So making sure that the US side is great, but we also have to make sure that the Canadian site is also great and it's performing and there's no issues with it specifically. So we have two separate URLs that we're able to get the content based upon US versus Canada. And specifically, we wanted to serve that in and say, this is the URL of the multi-dev we would be testing with. So we'll pass that in as an environment variable. And then on line 6, we are specifically, this is where we start the individualized tests. So IT is referring to the actual test that we want to do. And we're saying that we want to confirm there's a link to the alternate site on that homepage. And so we're saying what page we want to visit to. We're saying we want to visit to the homepage. So the slash, we want to go to the bottom of the site all the way to the bottom. So scroll all the way to the bottom. And then we want to get the specific, using CSS selectors, we are specifically identifying, okay, here's the link we want to grab. And we want to make sure that it has the text Coit USA. And then we want to make sure it has a specific class of menu link US. And that was, again, the simplest test we wrote just to start dipping our toe into the water of doing some simplistic end-to-end testing.
Yeah, and even with this simple test, like this probably ends up catching a lot of failure states. Like if there were a PHP error and the site weren't loading at all, this would catch. Beforehand, did you mention that these links are added in via JavaScript? Or is that a different one?
These are being added in via JavaScript, which is one of those, which was another sort of issue we ran into with running things like Behat, is while you can get Behat through a set of add-ons, you can get Behat to run JavaScript tests and check things. It just became overly complex for what we needed to do, and just simply being able to load it in a browser. And but yeah, getting Behat to run with Selenium, and then Selenium being able to use these specific drivers, it just became too cumbersome. And that's what was yet another reason why we settled on Cypress.
Yeah, this generation of testing tools that seems to have like grown up on an extensible Chromium baseline. I don't know how much that makes a difference, but it seems to help a lot when you're not like building from Selenium up. I'm curious about some of the other details here. So like line 8, scroll to bottom. Is that happening just so that the video that is getting recorded is easier to understand, or is that happening because there's also a JavaScript thing happening where like the link only becomes available when you scroll to the bottom?
No, it was purely just because, again, the video piece of it, we wanted to be able to verify not just in the test was running. We wanted to also have peace of mind that in the video that we were getting, we could certainly see that happening.
Yeah. Do you ever share the videos with your client?
We don't usually share them with them unless we feel there's a need to. But I will say 9 times out of 10, we don't have to. And they're more for internal usage only.
Yeah.
But they're there if the client ever wants to see them.
Yeah. I've just in toying with Cypress, I found like, oh, this runs so fast that it's kind of hard to follow what's happening. In toying around with it, like I've sometimes put in like waiting functions. Like I'll just have it wait for 1,000 milliseconds so that the video is easier to follow. How much do you end up changing the viewports? Like, is that something that you end up setting or changing test by test?
We currently, I would say we usually set it at the beginning of the test. So in the group, we'll usually set it. And it's really because I think we are more looking at how things are working on a desktop. But to a certain extent, yes, if you were doing a set of tests for mobile and you wanted to figure out how those tests were running on in a mobile screen size, then we certainly want to change those to say, okay, on this test, I want the screen size to be specifically this.
Yeah. The Canada URL piece so we saw Coit.com for the live site. Like, is it a different subdomain or something, or a different top level domain?
Yep. So it's a different subdomain. It is just ca.coit.com, and we can see that there's a vast majority of things slightly different on the homepage. So the map of what locations are being served is different. It can be some of the services are slightly different. The testimonials are different because they are Canada based. The careers that are the positions that are open are going to be different because they're tailored more towards Canada. So it is a completely different. It's also a different layout. So there are, while this one might have, I think this one has a map there. I think we have emergency restorations and services, which is not a service offered by Canada. So this whole section has been removed. So each of the pages are different as in terms of the content that they could be serving.
Could you show how that works in the Pantheon dashboard, like the connecting of different domains? Like,
yeah.
So
once we're in here, as part of the CI process, we actually we create a custom domain for both the US and for Canada to be able to say, okay, this is the Canadian domain, and then this is the US domain. We'll be able to test for the specific PR.
All right. Feature request time. Sean, I can guess how you're doing this, and maybe we could just, I'm guessing you're like doing this directly through Terminus, and it might be helpful to show that. But this, to me, like as a Pantheon employee, this to me feels like something we could be making easier on you. How about we show the Terminus command that you must be calling to make this possible, and then let's take a moment and ask, like, could we make that part easier?
Yeah. So the Terminus command we are specifically running, we're running a few different commands actually. So the first one we are running, and let me get and we'll get the script specifically. So we have a specific function that we're running, and we wrote this function to add the domain to Pantheon. So specifically adding whatever domain we pass in as an argument. And then we wrote a special sort of drush command that would interact with Cloudflare for us and create the CNAME for us within Cloudflare. So that way we could make sure that it was functioning properly and it was an actual live domain. And then once we did that, we went ahead, and because we're using domain access for one of our modules to serve our domain content, we then had to write that custom command that would add that alias to the site for us. So specifically, we're adding an alias to the US site, and then we're adding an alias for the Canada site for within the Drupal site itself. And then here's where we're taking those custom DNS records from our Pantheon domain that we added up here, and then we're creating them as Cloudflare records in our Cloudflare interface.
I did not realize this site was a domain access site. I have not worked with domain access since Drupal 7. Sean, let's get you back on the live stream to talk just about the domain access parts. Well, yeah, so this is clearly working for you. Like, is there a way we could perhaps be making this easier for you, or are you thinking like, you know what, this is just fine? This is why I'm an architect.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we have here is, I think what we have here, it's working and it's good for us. I couldn't see it getting much better than what we have. I think the only difficult piece for me was being able to get the value from our Terminus command. So for instance, when I wanted to get the DNS from that specific domain that we added, I needed to do some special bash commands that would say, okay, give me this in a CSV format, and then I wanted to use awk, and then using awk, I ended up grabbing this, and then I had to use sed to specifically give me the specific values that I needed, and so that's probably the only different part of this. But other than that, that's good. and that works actually pretty smoothly. So what we have here, I think, is good, and it works, and it's when we write it in using the functions, we write it in its most simplistic format of, hey, here's how we want to add those domains. This is the site on the Drupal side that we want to add it to, and then this is the specific domain we want to be adding.
I am very impressed. And time is flying by here. We're already 40 minutes in. I mean, it's the YouTube live stream. There is no time cap. I feel like we should perhaps wrap things up sooner rather than later. If anyone is watching and has any specific questions or wants to see us dive into it, Chris Reynolds says ChatGPT will write all that bash for you. Yes. Yeah, I got comfortable in Bash once I started working at Pantheon and had to set up some of these CI processes myself. And yeah, if I could get ChatGPT or something like it to write set and awk commands for me so that I don't have to, I suppose then it's not so bad. All right, Sean, is there anything else in particular that you want to show off before we wrap it up?
I think the other big thing that maybe you and I quickly touched on previously was we mentioned the Cypress tests, but we also run one of the other big tests we run is visual regression testing.
Yes,
visual regression testing is really good for when we want to be able to check when simply we want to take a static version of the site and compare it to the production site, and it's something that lets us quickly catch those differences. So there we go. I wanted to get the index file specifically, but we can see these. So we use Backstop.js to do our visual regression testing, and we can compare them. Hey, this is the live site, and then this is the multi-dev that we're creating. And you can see the pink visually outlines, okay, here's where these differences are that we ran into. We can quickly see that on this test that we did that, hey, here's the differences. I think you can use this nifty little scrubber to see like what specifically those differences were. So we saw those up there, and then we could see, hey, this image didn't fully load for whatever reason, and then these tests, the text here is slightly different. So this is another big thing we like to use because it can help us try to catch regressions on key pages before they make it to the public or the live site.
And are those testimonials there like loading in a random order? Is that why
they are?
Yeah, I see.
They are. So we would probably want for something like this, we might want to just add a test to exclude, not a test, but we would add an exclusion for this section, which is another great thing we like about Backstop is that we can add exclusions to things like if we had a slider or if we had a video showing, then we could say, hey, exclude this section so that it doesn't count it as being wrong.
Makes sense. Yeah, I first saw visual regression tests demoed by a previous Pantheon at DrupalCon Los Angeles, I think in 2015. Like, that sounds cool, and I was skeptical, but they're like, this could be super helpful for like updating modules. And I just so happened to have had a side project website that I knew had a bunch of out-of-date modules, and out of like a dozen content types, there was one view mode where one field printed twice. And that's something I totally would not have caught just doing a quick visual inspection. Like, oh, there's a field that printed twice because of a weird panels config thing. And yeah, from that point on, I was totally sold on visual regression tests as being valuable because the robots are so much better at this than we are. All right, well, Sean, thanks so much. But before we go, I want to review in crayon and Lego diagram form what at a very high level what I think we've seen here today. So I've brought over a pre-drawn diagram. So radically oversimplify what we've seen here. Sean, you and your team, you're working on your laptops. In any given sprint, do you use sprints? I didn't even ask you. Do you use sprints?
So and this is an overly complex answer, but the short answer is we don't in support. We do in our build process, but we don't in our support because we believe that being able to push things out quicker. So being able to use the power of web ops really, I think, is what we want to be able to do. So that's where multi-devs come in key. So no, we don't use sprints.
Cool. All right. I forgot to label that part, and I'm low on space. So I'll just do MD for multi-dev. So maybe you're working on multiple support fixes at once, color-coded brown, purple, pink. You're pushing those branches up to GitHub, making pull requests on GitHub. The CI process, CircleCI, sees those changes, pushes over to Pantheon multi-dev environments per GitHub branch, per branch on your local laptop. You're doing all sorts of complex stuff to put custom domains on these multi-devs, and your Coit stakeholders can check out the multi-dev environments on their phones, on whatever devices, give you feedback as to whether or not they like the new button colors or whatever the change is. When you get the approval from your Coit stakeholder, I imagine you're making the merge on GitHub, and then that's pushing to a Pantheon dev environment. Is that what happens?
So yes. So ultimately, we are merging in that pull request, and that pull request, that merge, is now triggering another build in CI, which then ends up pushing to the dev environment.
Cool. All right. So we go from GitHub to CI straight to dev after it's merged, and then you can use the Pantheon dashboard to go dev test live.
Correct.
All right. I love it. I love it, Sean. Thanks so much for sharing what this looks like out in the real world.
No problem.
Looking forward to seeing you in person at DrupalCon. Yes?
Yes, I will be there.
All right. All right. Thanks so much, Sean. And thanks, everyone, for watching.